Welcome back to the Rock Prospect Podcast. My name is Amy Nixon. That is Michael Ween. And today we are covering the NFL coaching carousel for 2026. We've had nine coaches get fired this offseason, I think. I think it's 8 or 9, which is pretty insane. There's a lot to cover. So what we have done is we've amassed a collection of questions on only a few.
Hello? Mm.
What just happened?
I don't know. You froze on my end, and then I have no idea.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. All of a sudden, I just completely lost you, and then it was the screen was the live was just done. But now the ticker's going again. So I don't know. I guess are we still live? We still good?
Yeah, we're 4 minutes in.
Okay. Well, I don't know how much y'all caught of that. But basically, I had just um told y'all to subscribe, and yeah, so do that. So Michael, how are you doing, man?
I'm pretty good. It's Wednesday, January 21st. We are coming up here on the end of football season. It's bittersweet. Got 3 games left, 2 championship games this weekend in the Super Bowl 2 weeks after that. We just wrapped up another great college football season. But we've got football content year round. We're not just one of those podcasts that subscribes. We're not a podcast that subscribes to having an off season. So if you like the NFL, if you like college football, if you're a big Texas Longhorn fan, Please like and subscribe so you can get all our episodes, Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports included, and the Raw Prospect Football Podcast, where we'll be doing stuff like this, going in depth on roster building, the draft, free agency, the coaching carousel, our teams. You get a little bit of everything here. And so we greatly appreciate it. We want to build a small community. Subscribe. It just takes a couple of a button, and it doesn't cost you anything. Let's get into this.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so first order of business. When I do this and pull up my are you still able to hear me?
Yeah. Are you there? Hello?
Yeah, I'm not. I won't. I guess I can't do that. I won't be trying that again. I guess. Um, okay, so I'll have to go with no notes this pod. So if y'all aren't noticing, I'm having to record on my phone because my laptop is completely cooked. Like it just will not work at all. In terms of like recording a podcast in any type of way. Like we get 10 minutes in and it completely like just shits on itself. So here we are. I'm recording on my phone. I'm not going to have my notes in front of me. But the first order of business is on the Atlanta Falcons and their hiring of Kevin Stefanski. And I don't have the question in front of me, but the premise of it is essentially, can Kevin Stefanski get Atlanta to the playoffs within his first 3 years of coaching the team? Can he be the one to get them out of purgatory? We'll start with you, Michael. What do you think?
Well, I think he can. I really like this hire by the Falcons. I've always liked Kevin Stefanski. He's a two-time Coach of the Year. He won Cleveland a playoff game in his tenure with the Browns. I thought he did a lot of good things with the Browns in what was really an unstable situation. With Jimmy Haslam, their ownership, and the general manager there, it was a real unstable, meddling kind of situation that I didn't think fit Kevin Stefanski particularly well. And I think paired with a new front office and obviously better infrastructure on both on the offensive line and around Michael Penix Jr., another young quarterback. I like the innovative offensive mind that Kevin Stefanski is. I like that he's getting better personnel with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, who's really emerged as a really nice wide receiver one for them. Darnell Mooney, obviously their two backs, have a good run game. They have some young, talented defensive players. The keys for me for Stefanski, who's going to be the defensive coordinator? I'm unsure as of this recording if they've hired one yet, but that'll be an interesting move to me. And then number two, is he going to be able to handle everything else that comes with being a head coach? Because it felt like at times in Cleveland, when things went wrong, I don't think he's the type of head coach that is going to step in and immediately solve those kinds of problems that stem from higher up in the organization. He strikes me as a guy who's a little more reserved, a little more focused in his lane. But he's a really good coach. Otherwise, he wouldn't have won a playoff game in Cleveland. He wouldn't have, he wouldn't be a two-time Coach of the Year. I think it's a really good hire for Atlanta. There's just a couple questions. But the good thing is, if you look at the landscape of the NFC South, it's very unpredictable on a year-to-year basis. The Panthers are on the rise. They're on a positive trajectory. The Buccaneers are going to be at least competitive in that division as long as they got Baker Mayfield and their roster stays healthy. So you obviously have a chance with this talented Falcons roster to I think, take that next step and potentially win this division. And I think that's the easiest route for the Falcons to eventually make the playoffs, at least in this current landscape of the NFC, where it's pretty deep with a lot of contenders across the board with the rise of the Bears, the Packers, the Lions, if their window's still open, and a bunch of other teams, especially in the NFC West. So I think if you give me 3 years, I say the Falcons are in the playoffs. 2 years, I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I think we're kind of on the same wavelength on this hire, but a couple things that I want to address. I've been seeing a lot of talk about Kevin Stefanski and kind of people questioning what he actually brings to the table because of what's happened in Cleveland over these last few years. And I'll make this pretty clear. Like, there's no question about it. This guy's a good head coach. Like, we don't know, like, if he's a to your point, I don't think he's the kind of guy that's going to steady the ship when shit goes up shit's creek, for lack of a better term. Like, that's kind of what happened in Cleveland, and things probably could have gone better than what they did, but in like for the most part, like when Cleveland had a good roster and had decent health, they were competitive and making the playoffs, which you can't say about Cleveland coaches of the past or just really the Cleveland Browns organization in general in this side of the century. So that part of it, like, clearly he's a really good coach. So you're hiring a guy with um, with a decent track record, that if he has some type of quarterback play that's like somewhat competent, my confidence in him comes from his ability to form a run game. And that's where I'm excited about this because this Falcons offensive line, it's built for what Kevin Stefanski likes to do, which is the wide zone run game. So
Yep.
that offensive line, Bijan Robinson, which we saw what he did for years with Nick Chubb in the backfield. Imagine what he's going to be able to do with Bijan Robinson. That's what I'm excited about.
Absolutely. He'll absolutely be able to thrive with this two-headed monster with Algier and Bijan Robinson primarily in the run game. And you're right. When he's had starting level caliber quarterback play, he's a above 500 head coach. With Baker Mayfield, he was 18-12, 1-1 in the playoffs. Without Baker Mayfield, he was 27-44, 0-1 in the playoffs. But the Browns always had good offensive line play. They always had a pretty good run game. It was just it was a revolving door at quarterback. The Deshaun Watson move obviously imploded on the Browns. I don't think it was a good decision to trade for Deshaun Watson, but it was not obviously a good decision to give him $250 million guaranteed. And that situation obviously imploded on them. But you can't put that completely at the feet of Kevin Stefanski, although he may have had a part in it. We just don't know. But in Atlanta, I think it's a more stable organization with, than Cleveland. There will be less noise. There will be less drama. And I like the fact that Atlanta is hiring some professionals in that front office, they've made changes top to bottom. It's not just another coach with a front office that had failed to put a roster together that was good enough to not just make the playoffs in the NFC, but win what for the last half decade has been a pretty poor division. So
Yeah.
I think if you give me 3 years with one or two more good drafts, maybe a couple signings here and there in free agency, yes, Atlanta will find their way into the playoffs.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about that as well. But yeah, let's move forward here. That was a good conversation. Our next question. As the Titans head coach.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you for a second. I wanted to hear. I had the outline in front of me, so let me run this.
Okay.
Our next head coaching opening that we want to talk about here, and sorry guys for the technical difficulties. It's happening on both ends. Nothing we can really do about it. Buy or sell, Emmy. We're going to talk about this Titans opening that has been filled. They're one of 4 openings that has been filled, and they fill it with a guy who's been a head coach previously in a dysfunctional organization, and that's Robert Saleh. Buy or sell, Emmy. Robert Saleh will win the AFC South in his first contract with the Titans, which is a 5-year contract. Buy or sell?
I buy that because you look at it, there's a real chance that within the next 2 years, Cam Ward is going to end up being the best quarterback in that division. And, obviously you have Trevor Lawrence, and obviously he is a solid to good. Well, no, not solid. He's a good quarterback. He's like somewhere in the 6 to 12 range in quarterback rankings any given week, essentially. He's a little bit like up and down in that sense, but he's a good quarterback. But Cam Ward has legitimate, like, superhuman ability at the quarterback position. I went back and watched some of his highlights from his rookie year. There were some throws that he made this year that I think if people went back and watched and like you told them, oh, Josh Allen was the one that made that throw, like it would be an entirely different perception. And obviously that goes with anyone that's on a losing team, but you get the point. Is not a lot of people watched the Titans play this year, and not a lot of people realized how good of a year Cam Ward had, considering everything that went on within that organization with the bad coaching and the lack of roster talent.
Yeah, earlier this month, this is what stood out to me. Their new general manager, Mike Borgonzi, this is what he said about what he was looking for in Tennessee's next head coach. Yeah, that's a good question. It's a lot to do with leadership. It's having a clear vision, having standards for what you do, and then having that person not be afraid of conflict in a negative way, but being able to hold people accountable is the biggest thing throughout the whole building, staff, players. And how do you do that? And that person has to connect everybody in the building too. So you have to have that balance there of being demanding, connecting people in the building, and just bringing people together. So those are the big things that we're really looking for. Obviously, they have to have a strategic vision in terms of philosophy and X's and O's as well. Robert Saleh checks all those boxes. The Titans have a lot of nice pieces on defense. He is a wizard when it comes to the X's and O's of defensive schematics. He's a culture setter. He's a demanding leader. They hired a head coach who is going to set a culture in Tennessee that they've desperately needed. He's going to stabilize the entire building. He's going to connect that building, players, coaches, downstream, all the way up to the top. He's the kind of guy that was in a bad situation in New York where clearly nobody has survived that debacle of a situation with the Jets. That was just a bad situation, wasn't going to work from the start. Now he gets a second, what I think is going to be a pretty damn good quarterback in Cam Ward, and he gets a division that's volatile year to year. He gets the Texans, who clearly I think have the best defense in the division, but they now have a quarterback situation that is now much more murky 2 years down the road than it was probably going into this year or even last year with CJ Stroud. There are questions about his future in Houston. We don't know how that's going to work out. They can't solve the offensive line. Tennessee matches up well with them from that standpoint, given that they have a really good defense that's going to only be strengthened by the X's and O's schematical advantage that Salah's going to give them on that side of the ball. He's going to bring that building together. The offensive coordinator hire will be of interest to me because I think the offensive coordinator and Cam Ward need to see eye to eye. He needs to get that right. But there's no reason with a Jaguars organization that I still can't fully trust, although they have a really good coach in Liam Cohen, and I would say a top 12 quarterback the way he played this season in Trevor Lawrence. And you have a Colts roster that's pretty good. They're a pretty good, stable organization, but they have Daniel Jones, who's going to be coming off a major Achilles injury next year. So there's no reason to me, with some instability within the division, some volatility within the division, that Saleh can't come in, bring in some good veterans, as the Titans have plenty of cap space that they can utilize to spend on some free agents and improve the roster in key spots. The past two drafts for the Titans have been really underrated. They've gotten multiple good young players, both on offense and defense. I like this new general manager and the direction this is heading. Robert Saleh is just going to come in, set a culture, set a standard, and as long as he makes that good offensive coordinator hire, things are looking up for the Titans. And I think it might not, I don't think it's going to be next year. It might not even be the year after, but I think by year 3, they're definitely in the race to win the AFC South, because 2 years down the road, you don't know what's going to be happening with the Texans. You don't know what's going to be happening with the Daniel Jones Indianapolis situation. We have no idea at that point. So I like this hire by Tennessee.
Yeah, the only thing you can really say that's negative about this hire, because everybody knows at this point how good of a coach Robert Saleh is. Like, he left the Jets, or not left, he got fired by the Jets midseason, and that team did not win a game the rest of the year. So that says a lot. The only negative thing you can really say is the fact that they fired Mike Vrabel to only end up with a Mike Vrabel type of coach who's arguably a worse version of Mike Vrabel 2 years later. So that's really the only negative thing you can say about this. From every single standpoint, based on the cards that they've dealt themselves, this was as good of a hire as they could make. Absolutely. So completely agree with everything you said there. And I don't think we don't need to go too much further on that, because I think you hit on everything.
Just one more thing for Titans fans out there, if you're listening. Pretty low chance that any Titans fan is, but who knows? Robert Saleh's defenses have been elite over the years, in case you guys didn't know. 2019 San Francisco, they had the number 2 total defense. 2020 San Francisco, the number 5 total defense. 2021 San Francisco, before he left for the Jets, they had the number 3 total defense. And then 2021, the number 4 total defense with the Jets. 2023, the number 3 total defense with the Jets. 2024, number 3 total defense. This has been, he's an elite defensive coach. They just got to find the offensive coordinator, build out this coaching staff, and help Cam Ward continue to progress, hit on some draft picks, and boom, you're set.
Yep. And they've got $81 million in effective cap space this summer and a new stadium in the works. So
exactly.
This is a organization that's going to be looking to spend heavily this offseason.
Last random question on the coaching carousel before we get to a Pittsburgh Steelers deep dive segment that I'm really excited about. And at the end, if we have time, we will do some championship game predictions for this weekend. And again, we're not hitting on every single opening today. We have the entire offseason. Coaches are going to be hired over the next couple of weeks. We'll continue to talk about this in upcoming episodes.
Yeah.
This might be the most exciting question of the entire podcast. If you were a head coaching candidate, offensive, defensive, I don't care, and you got offered both of these jobs, Baltimore and Buffalo, they say, Emmy, you can have the job. You can have either job in the current state of both franchises. Which job are you taking? Money being equal, which job are you taking?
Yeah, so here's where my mind goes with this. For one, you have one organization in Baltimore that you don't have to worry about ownership overstepping. Like, we've never heard about anything of that nature coming out of Baltimore since they've been a franchise. From the moment Baltimore became a team in the 90s, I believe it was, they immediately, well, not immediately, they pretty much right away hit the ground running within the first few years of being a team. So from that standpoint, the Ravens have a history of winning. They do have the elite quarterback in Lamar Jackson, who did, I don't want to say regress, but he didn't play up to his level this year. There's no question about that. So there's a question mark from that front in terms of, can Lamar get back to who he was the year prior? But in Baltimore, you have a roster that's quite a bit younger. You have more star pieces throughout the roster. You look at, you look at wide receiver. It's Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, like running back Derrick Henry, obviously up there in age, but a pillar of that offense. And then defensively, Nate Wiggins, Kyle Hamilton, Justin Madubuike. You have pillars up and down that roster. And in my opinion, that roster is in a much better spot than Buffalo's roster is. Now, that all being said, you do have that motherfucker named Josh Allen in Buffalo, which is the great equalizer here. But if I were to pick which job I wanted, I'm going to pick Baltimore just because for me personally, I look at Baltimore's, ideas around roster building and their ability to roster build from a GM standpoint and a front office standpoint. And I look at Buffalo's and I think it's not on the same level. I don't think Buffalo is bad at roster building. They've hit on picks. You're not a good team without that. But Baltimore has the more complete roster. And I think for a lot of years now, I think McDermott has overachieved with the roster talent that he's had on those defenses.
I'm a Steelers fan, so I never take the Baltimore job. No, I'm kidding. I actually agree with you. I went back and forth on this question, but I landed on the same wavelength that you did. And it's not by that much because Josh Allen, I think, despite being a year older than Lamar Jackson, is and has shown to be the more dominant, more durable superstar at quarterback than Lamar Jackson has been, even though Lamar obviously has those 2 MVPs, Allen only having 1. They're both great, though. Like, even if Lamar Jackson is 80% of what he once was, say, 2 or 3 years ago, he's still a top 5, 7 quarterback in the league. He's still a superstar. And I think part of the reason you saw him, my bigger question is not like, can Lamar Jackson play at an elite level? My question with some of the injuries that have started to surface over the last 2 years is he going to stay healthy? That's something that people were worried about with his style of play early when he got drafted by the Ravens. And obviously, he's been very durable to a certain extent up until these last couple years. I'm not too worried about that. I think if you can come in and fix a couple issues here and there on this roster, maybe get him a couple, maybe retool that offensive line. Not too worried about it from an injury standpoint. He's got an entire offseason to get healthy. And he's locked in long term, obviously, just like Josh Allen is. So I think Allen is the great equalizer here. But they did a poll on The Athletic this morning. And basically what they did is they interviewed a bunch of like former coaches or current coaches, former GMs, and they asked them to rank the best head coaching openings in the NFL currently. Now, in this poll, Buffalo got 7 first place votes, and they were ranked the number 1 job in the NFL, the number 1 opening, Baltimore being number 2. And honestly, it could go either way, but for me, in this article, you have an anonymous coach saying Baltimore's the best overall organization out of these 10 organizations that currently have head coaching openings. And I agree with that statement. They're looking for their 4th coach in franchise history, but John Harbaugh just had an incredible 18-year run in Baltimore where you basically had 0 organizational issues or meddling or any issues with the Ravens in his tenure. Lamar Jackson is a year younger than Josh Allen, so the Ravens are set at the most important position. They have as much stability with their front office and ownership as any organization in the NFL, so you don't have to worry about that. A coach can consistently expect the organization to put a good roster together, with have a good salary cap situation, never hamstring themselves from that standpoint. And they run their organization with a high degree of professionalism that I like. I worry with the whole Brandon Beane situation right now in Buffalo. Don't like some of the things that are going on there. I think Baltimore is the model of stability in today's NFL. They're consistently contending. I would pick Baltimore, even though in my heart, I don't know if I would ever do that since I am a diehard Steelers guy.
Yeah, and that would be a tough thing for you. I know that for sure. But yeah, if I were to bet on a quarterback still being at an elite level in a decade, so we're talking 2036 at what would it be? 38 years old for Josh Allen, probably 37 years old for Lamar Jackson. If I were to bet on one of these guys to be still at an elite level, it would be Josh Allen. But I also think that Buffalo organization is in a state of flux because of the decision to promote Bean, I forget his first name, to president of football operations. Because if he doesn't get the head coach right this time around, he's out and the head coach is out, and it's going to be square one, clean slate. So you definitely want an organization that's a little bit more aligned than that.
And think about this. The AFC East now, you got the Patriots with Drake May and Mike Vrabel. That's A+ at head coach. That's A+ at quarterback. They've got good ownership. They know how to run an organization. They're going to be contenders here for the next foreseeable future. So if I go to Buffalo, yes, I got Josh Allen. I've got the biggest chess piece on the board out of everybody, arguably. And yes, he's going to be great for a long time. And I could hit on some draft picks and make that roster better. It is still a very intriguing situation, but I got to compete with that organization. In the AFC North, I got to compete with Cleveland, who changes coaches about every other 2-3 years, it seems like. Very unstable organization. I got to compete with a Bengals organization who has Joe Burrow, yes, still in his prime. When he plays, he's fantastic, but that organization does not spend money. They're one of the cheapest organizations in the NFL. They failed to put a competent offensive line around Joe Burrow. He continues to get hurt. We have no evidence to suggest over the last 3 years that next year or the year after, as he continues to age, he's going to be able to stay healthy to no fault of his own. But the situation just isn't great for him. And I think in 2 years, hell, he could be out of Cincinnati. He could demand a trade. So that's not a great situation. And
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, they're a stable organization. They're always going to be somewhat competitive. They're never going to be a dumpster fire, although we'll get to that in a minute. But they've got no quarterback. They don't have a head coach. And they're going to have to go through like a mini retool rebuild before they're Super Bowl contenders again. So I just look at it from that perspective and I say, do I want to go to Buffalo, deal with Brandon Beane, deal with ownership, try to build a roster that can compete with New England and try to win it that way? Or do I want to go to the AFC North, to the model of stability, a model organization for roster building and, ownership and everything else, and compete in a division that in all three of the other situations you have major questions?
Yeah. No, that's totally fair. Yeah. Okay. I think that does it for that conversation. Now we get into your Pittsburgh Steelers, Michael. Um, so here's how this is gonna go. So there's gonna be 3 stages to this. We're gonna kind of get into how we got here from the Pittsburgh perspective, and I know Michael has a lot to say on that front. Number 2, oh, okay. Can you remind me what the second and third one was?
Yeah, so this is a segment I'm really excited about. Basically, what we're gonna do, we've this is a 3-prong segment. So there are 3 separate sections. We're gonna break this down in 3 ways. The first way, and I actually want to hear Emmy's quick thoughts on this first question first before I start to ramble, because who knows how long that could take, is how did we get here? Ultimately, where did Mike Tomlin's tenure with the Steelers go wrong? And why did he step down? Why are we in this situation? Then we're going to talk about what the first order of business is, what the priority should be for the next head coach that is going to be hired, outside of the low-hanging fruit, which is find a quarterback. We all know the Steelers need to find a quarterback. Don't say that. Don't have that be your answer. We all know that has to happen. But outside of that, what needs to change organizationally, roster-wise, philosophy-wise, for the Steelers to get back to being an actual contender in today's NFL with their new head coach? And then finally, we're going to talk about how we would define success for the Steelers in the next 3 seasons or so with the new head coach, whoever that's going to be. All right, so this should be a pretty fun segment. I know I have a lot of thoughts, but I want to start with Emmy here. I want to hear your thoughts on how we got here with Tomlin, him stepping down, and where you ultimately think Tomlin's tenure went wrong, I guess is how you put it.
Yeah, so the thing with Tomlin is I wonder if, at some point within his tenure, the lack of, I guess, ability to go outside of his lane and take risk in terms of like pushing the envelope forward in terms of one, the amount of staff, coaching staff. I mean, it's not breaking news that the Steelers have I think they have the smallest coaching
Correct.
staff in the league in terms of actual number of coaches.
Correct.
and the smallest or one of the smallest scouting departments as well.
Correct.
So there's certainly a archaic way of thinking as to, okay, this is the way that we do it. We're gonna stick with this, which
Correct.
works to an extent, but we've gotten to a point in the NFL where there's a ceiling to that, and we've seen that, and I think we've seen that ceiling for sure. Um, Number two is that also plays into the actual schemes that he's implementing. So not just from a um, actual structure standpoint, looking into the scheming, this like defensively, we've talked about it. This has been a very basic vanilla Steelers defense these last few years. And I think that's where Steelers fans have a lot of gripes is like, okay, there's been weeks where, the Steelers do their black magic thing where they get the turnovers, they get the big plays, right? But is this really the ceiling for the highest paid defense in the NFL?
No.
No. And I think the answer is no. Um, just from are we putting guys in the best position to make impacts on the football game? And the answer is no, absolutely not. I don't think so. Offensively, even like in the hires that he has made, there's just been I think a, it's the same thing, kind of lack of ability to go outside of the box and delve into, say, the McVay tree or the Shanahan tree or outside of his way of football, which is, a lot of 21 personnel, two tight ends, run the shit out of the football. That's the Steeler way, and that's not going to change. But there has to be a point where you implement more modern stuff, more creative scheming, where you can, that's how you win on the margins is within those details. And that's where the Steelers haven't gotten anything these last few years. So that's what I have to say on it. I think it's just overall a lack of ability to evolve from that standpoint. And he's had to evolve in other ways as a head coach in terms of, it's a new era of, young players that are coming to the NFL that grew up on cell phones and everything like that. He's done a great job doing that. But in other ways, the way he does things has become outdated. And, obviously part of that is Wayne Rooney, part of that is like whatever. But at some point, the finger goes back to your head coach, and that's Mike Tomlin. Because at any point he could have said, "Hey, let's get a bigger scouting department. Let's hire more staff. Let's, have some more creativity." But that didn't happen.
So bear with me here because I agree with almost everything you said. Long story short, when this news broke, I was landing on a flight from Pittsburgh to Dallas on my way back from that wild card playoff game against the Texans, which I went to go and watch in person. And I was like, I'll put it this way. I didn't expect, I knew there was a possibility. There were rumblings through people connected to the organization that this could happen. But I didn't expect it to happen basically 12 hours after the conclusion of Monday night's game on my flight back to Austin, or on my way back to Austin. So it was kind of a shock how quickly this happened. But for the first time in 19 years, the Steelers are looking for a head coach. Okay. Before I get into like kind of elaborating on everything that you said and putting my own spin on it, on where this thing obviously went wrong and became stale, let me just say this. I am a big fan of Mike Tomlin. I really am. He I got to see him as my head coach of my favorite team win a Super Bowl. 2 years later, get to another Super Bowl, play in multiple AFC Championship games in the prime of Ben Roethlisberger. And I've never really seen in my conscientious football watching life of this organization, I've never seen this team not be in contention to at least get to the playoffs. Every single year, Tomlin was able to raise the floor of rosters that were flawed. He is the ultimate floor-raising head coach, and that's not a shot at Tomlin. Like the consistency, the model of consistency that he was in the regular season, winning 9+ games, being above 500 every single year, and only having one game in his 19 seasons in the NFL that was meaningless. Only one game where the Steelers were out of playoff contention. Only one game in 19 seasons. That's pretty fucking incredible.
Yeah.
So the model of consistency, the floor raiser, the ultimate floor raiser, the ultimate motivator, super cool guy. I think like if they're out of every head coach, if I had to pick a group of coaches to go have a beer with at a bar, Tomlin's definitely in that group. I think he could definitely go somewhere else and do a really good job, especially in an organization that's maybe trying to find some stability and just get to a competitive like standpoint, making the playoffs, things of that nature. I think he has strengths that almost nobody else has. He is the ultimate floor setter in the NFL. He raised the floor of the Pittsburgh Steelers for years with quarterbacks that honestly shouldn't even be starting and aren't starting in the league currently. Everything that he did for the organization, I'm thankful for. And I just wanted to put that out there. And then secondly, I think Mike Tomlin is going to get into the Hall of Fame. Might not be first ballot, but I do think with the respect that he's obviously garnered from the media, every other coach around the league, former coaches, current coaches, general managers across the league that would be lining up to hire him if he wanted another job right now. And obviously, I think the Hall of Fame voters, I think he's going to get in.
And his players, too.
And his players. I think he's going to get into the Hall of Fame whenever that is, 5 years down the road, 6 years down the road, whenever he's eligible. If he's ultimately done coaching, he'll get it. But having said that, I personally don't think that he should be the lock to the Hall of Fame that everyone else seems to tend to think he should be. Just because of his last half, the last half of his tenure in Pittsburgh was not up to the standard of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he matched Marvin Lewis's record for consecutive playoff losses with 7 in his last 7 playoff games. Most all of them being non-competitive. And I just think that's a huge knock in the way that it ended. Not having won a playoff game for almost a decade with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the fact that he has no coaching tree really to speak of. I think those are knocks on his legacy, and I'm not sure he should be the lock to the Hall of Fame that everyone thinks he is. But I do think he will get it. So that now that we have that all out of the way, we can talk about where things ultimately went awry here. First of all, I want to thank Tomlin because I think he did the organization a favor by stepping down. I think he made the right decision. Steelers were able to avoid a messy breakup with a coach who's, never had a losing season and consistently made them competitive. They didn't have to fire him per se, which the Steelers don't really fire coaches under contract. And because Tomlin relinquished his position and wasn't fired technically, if he decides to coach again, the Steelers retain his rights, meaning they could I guess, obtain some kind of compensation for his services. If he maybe takes this year off and then, coaches in 2027, a team would have to compensate the Steelers for his services, which I like. So I thank Tomlin from that standpoint. I think by stepping down, he did this organization a bit of a favor because it's an organization that, as you said, is operating in a 2005, 2008, 2010 mindset with that kind of philosophy. In what year is it, Emmy? 2025, 2026. They're trying to do things the way that they did them back when it was a different league in the early 2000s, late 2000s, early 2010s, when they were consistently in AFC championship games and winning Super Bowls. They're trying to do that same thing the way they built rosters then, and they're trying to keep up with the modern NFL now with those same principles and those same philosophies. Therefore, they've fallen behind because they haven't deviated from those ways. And not all that blame for that goes on Mike Tomlin, but a good portion of it should, because he should have been the guy, as boisterous as he can be and as good as he is when he walks into a room and really commands the attention of his players and can motivate people, and really his people skills are off the charts. Like, he should have been the guy to go to Art Rooney and say, hey, yes, we were great back then. We won Super Bowls with this kind of style of defensive football and defensive, heavy rosters with a really good quarterback in Big Ben. Like, we were able to do it then, but this is a different league now. He should have been the guy to, as you said, go to Kevin Colbert, now Omar Khan, Art Rooney ownership, and say, hey, we got to build a bigger staff. We got to innovate. We got to keep up. We got to adjust here to the new age NFL. And ultimately, that never happened. And that's what has the Steelers in the mud, in NFL purgatory, the worst place to be in the league, where they're consistently getting in the playoffs or being like a fringe playoff team, but never good enough to do anything else. That's been the problem. So ultimately, what this should do, by Tomlin stepping down, it should urge the Steelers or point them in a direction to where they have no choice but to change their ways. And that's the exciting part for Steelers fans, is when you look at the history of the Steelers, when they hired Chuck Noll, when they hired Bill Cowher, when they hired Mike Tomlin, the only three coaches they've had since 1969, the profile of those coaches is very consistent. You can basically write it down. It's young defensive coordinator in his 30s that's never been a head coach before. That's what Chuck Noll was when they hired him back in 1969. That's what Bill Cowher was. That's what Mike Tomlin was. When they hired Mike Tomlin back in 2007, he was the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. Nobody knew who he was, but he blew ownership away in his interviews, and boom, they were off to the races when they hired him. That's what the Steelers like. When you look at, I guess, organizationally, historically, who they've hired. So theoretically, if you're a Steelers fan, the hope is, if they continue with that philosophy, that they hire a young 30, 40-year-old, in his 30s, young, innovative defensive coordinator who can bring in a better, more creative ideas to that side of the football, and also do better from a standpoint of hiring, offensive coordinators, which Tomlin really failed to do in his tenure with the Steelers. But basically, it boils down to three things with Tomlin. Number one, 9 seasons, all winning seasons, but 0 playoff wins. There's never been a franchise in NFL history to go 9 seasons all above 500 and not win like anytime a franchise has gone 9 seasons, I forget what the stat is, but it's something like anytime a franchise has gone 9 seasons without with a winning record, or where they were consistently making the playoffs, there has not been a single time where that organization hasn't once broken through to play in at least one championship game. But in his last 9 seasons, a lack of playoff success, 0-7 in his last 7 playoff games, dropping him down to an 8-12 overall playoff record. That's not the Steelers standard. And I think that weighed on him, it weighed on the organization, and it made for a nice mutual parting of ways. Number 2, didn't hire coordinators well, offensive and defensive. He doesn't have a coaching tree. You look at the best coaches in the NFL, they all have some sort of coaching tree. Some of his hires were competent, but most of them, basically what I'm trying to say is he didn't hire coordinators who consistently gave the Steelers X's and O's schematical advantages every Sunday. And then number 3 is I'll stop right there, because ultimately number 3 works back up to Art Rooney in the way that they spend money. But those are the 2 main reasons that we are where we are today, is lack of playoff success and an organization that should, I'm not even sure if they do it anymore, but should expect to be in Super Bowl contention and not just make the playoffs as a baseline. And 2, a coach that failed to, for whatever reasons, hire innovative people. And that's why we are where we are today. So that was a long-winded, rant there. But our next question here, before we start to wrap things up, is, Emmy, what do you think the first order of business should be for the new coach that the Steelers hire, whoever that might be?
Yeah, I think the first order of business should be to prioritize hiring just a bigger staff, a more just more innovative staff. That's why Chris Shula is such a dream fit in this scenario, because he comes from the McVay tree. So in theory, he's going to bring over an offensive coach from the Rams that's within that tree and has that offensive acumen and learning under McVay. Has obviously the history behind his name in Shula, being the grandson of Don Shula, and clearly is a really good coach and is a creative defensive mind from that standpoint. So from that standpoint, just come in and bring on the change right away. Like, hey, now I'm running the show. Let's do this. Let's do this. Not being okay with just, okay, let's just run things the way Tomlin did, because then it's just going to be the same thing over again.
Yes. He is my favorite candidate right now that the Steelers have interviewed. I want Chris Shula, and the dream scenario would be you get Chris Shula and then you bring in their passing game guru Nate Shieldhouse as OC, who has learned under McVay. And then at that point, you'll hire a defensive coordinator, but I want it to be Shula's defense. And I would expect that it would be Shula's defense since he's a defensive coordinator. So, that's kind of my number 1 choice right now that's on the board. Outside of hiring a bigger staff, getting the right OC, and putting those puzzle pieces in place. But this new coach, one of the biggest priorities for this new coach should be retooling and reallocating how the money is spent and allocated on this roster. You mentioned it earlier, Emmy. Steelers, the last 5 years consecutively, have had the highest paid defense in the NFL. This past year, they were at $162 million in spending just on defense. They rank in the bottom 5 in the league in offensive spending. We are in a league now in the NFL in 2026 where the rules heavily favor and are tilted towards the offense, scoring points, and player safety. We are no longer in 2008, 2009, 2010, where those great Steeler defenses of the late 2000s can body slam Vince Young and give him a concussion and knock him out for 3 weeks. We're no longer in an era where James Harrison and Lamar Woodley and Casey Hampton can just absolutely wreck quarterbacks, or Ryan Clark and Troy Polamalu can hit defensive receivers over the middle like they did back then. The rules have changed. It's now an offensive league. Gone are the days of spending that much money on defense. You just cannot do it. And you look at the defensive roster, you've got a lot of good players on there. I still believe there are a lot of players on this defensive roster that can play. Good veterans that can go help other teams. But if I'm the Steelers coach, and this is what I think the new Steelers coach should do, trade some of these veterans. Reallocate the money to the offensive side of the ball. I would trade TJ Watt. I love TJ Watt as much as anyone. He is a top 5 Steeler I've ever watched, and I've been watching this team every single Sunday since 2003. But he's on more of a decline than he is, on the ups. And ultimately, I think it's time that the Steelers trade him. The contract extension was a mistake. He's not as productive as he was 2 years ago. Some injuries have played into that. I would trade him. I would look into trading Alex Highsmith. I would look into moving Jalen Ramsey. I would look into potentially moving a couple other costly defensive veterans that you have so that you can reallocate that cap space. Not just acquire draft capital, but you can reallocate that cap space to the offensive side of the ball. The Steelers need to change the way that they construct their rosters in 2026. Because spending that much money on defense is not good roster construction in 2026, but it's just not good team building process. So they need to absolutely change that for sure. I guess we can wrap things up here with just this. How would I define success for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the next 3 seasons with a new head coach? Ultimately, what I think this boils down to, find your quarterback of the future. And if I had to guess, that is going to be a guy that they draft, not this coming draft, but in the 2027 draft with the loaded quarterback class that's going to be. Find your quarterback for the future. And by year 3, have a playoff win. Is that too much to ask? Like, just get to the divisional round, maybe even the championship game, win a playoff game, get this thing back on track to being in Super Bowl contention maybe a couple years after that. But you obviously have to find your quarterback. You got to get a younger roster, and you got to win a playoff game. Simple as that. So that's how I would ultimately define success for the Steelers in their coaching search. Again, I think that Chris Shula is my favorite candidate on the board. I know the Steelers have interviewed Brian Flores. They're going to interview Anthony Weaver, the DC from Miami. They bring in Mike McCarthy. They've interviewed Jesse Minter. A lot of these candidates fit the profile historically for the Pittsburgh Steelers in the way that they've hired coaches in the past. Young defensive coordinator in his 30s who has not been a head coach yet. I like what Emmy talked about with Chris Shula. And ultimately with him, like, I think he'd be the perfect fit because when you look at the Rams situation, the Rams spend the least amount of money on defense in the NFL. And he gets the most every single Sunday out of that defense. With Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin, you get the highest paid defense. You have stars on this defense, aging stars. But the results didn't match the resources allocated to that side of the ball, especially in the playoffs, where those defenses, for many reasons, collapsed many times. So I could go on and on about the Steelers, but that's ultimately where we sit here right now, with the Steelers searching for a head coach for the first time in 19 seasons. It's pretty incredible where we sit here right now. But yeah, I'm not even sure where Emmy went. Ducked out in the middle of the podcast. I don't know if he lost internet or whatever the situation might be. But ultimately, guys, thank you guys for tuning in and bearing with us through some technical difficulties. We greatly appreciate your support. Comment down below if you are a fan of an NFL team with a head coach opening, one of the 6 remaining head coach openings. Who do you want to see be the next leader of your organization? And if you're a Steelers fan, who do you want to see the next head coach of the Steelers? Do you agree with a lot of the changes that we suggested need to be made within this organization? Who's your favorite to be the next head coach of the Steelers? We like that kind of engagement. We greatly appreciate that. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. But I think that's ultimately going to do it, as we're now over an hour, which is typically kind of where we like to land. So make sure you guys like and subscribe. We'll be back here in the next couple of days with an episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. But that's going to do it. We'll see you guys next time. This has been the Raw Prospect Football Podcast. Peace.